Welcome to Pavinar's, Webinars for the Pavement Community. My name is Andrew Bram, and today we'll be talking about some tips on responding to journal paper reviewer comments. Now before I get started, you do need to congratulate yourself, and congratulations, and please take a minute to pat yourself on the back. And this is because you made the first cut. If you receive an email from a journal saying that revisions are required, that means that they're interested in your paper, however, there is still some work to do. Now, there are three results that you can get from a paper. One is to accept with no revisions. Now, I've heard of this happening. It's never happened to me, but I've heard of it happening. And that's the best case scenario because you simply just have it published. However, more typically, there are requests with minor revisions and requests with major revisions. So those are kind of the two options that you'll probably see. I do want to acknowledge that there is a potential that the paper was rejected. While this is always disappointing, it has happened to me in the past and it will happen to me in the future. It is a part of peer-reviewed journal publications. But you can use the content in this Pavinar to review your paper and use the comments you get back to improve it before submitting to another journal. So there's still some useful content here. So you've received comments from the reviewers. What is the next step? Now, generally you get about 3 to 5 reviews and be ready for conflicting recommendations, comments that make you doubt the reviewer actually read your paper, and what I call tough love. These are all very difficult because a lot of them are preferential, so obviously you can have conflicts. A lot of them are, why are you even asking that question? I addressed that on page 7 or something along those lines. But I think more importantly, most reviewers are out to help the paper improve in quality. And that's what I call tough love. And it will take more work, but at the end of the day, you'll have a better product. And in my mind, the proper mindset for all of the comments is any comment will make the paper better. And we should see this as an opportunity to improve. Not as a criticism, but as a way to say the community believes there's a way for me to better present my information. How can we do that? And so take your reviewer comments to heart and make your paper better and improve your paper and improve yourself as a writer. It is also important, however, to remember that not all comments need to be fully incorporated. Sometimes you open that list of reviewer comments and, it just seems like you're going to have months and months of work to do. Well, review them all, look at all of the comments, think about them, but not all of them need to be fully incorporated. And I'll talk about that a little more in future slides. Now, I generally like to break comments into 3 different categories. The first category is the easiest one. Anything editorial, grammar, spelling-wise. This is just changes that a mistake was made and they need to be fixed. Now, some people may not be native English speakers, and that's fine. I have nothing but utmost respect for the fact that you're writing journal articles in a second or third language. But most universities have a writing center on campus. And please go to that writing center. Go to them and say, I'd like you to review my technical manuscript. I understand there's some technical content that may not be reviewable, but I really want help with my grammar and my spelling. And if you go to the writing center 2, 3, 4 times, your grammar and spelling will improve. Now, with all of these comments, however, you simply fix them and move on. There's really not a whole lot to talk about here beyond that. Now, the second category is what I call significant edits or added discussion. And this may involve revisiting literature. It may involve strengthening your analysis, perhaps make a couple more plots, look at some data in a slightly different way. You may need to run a handful more tests, but it's my opinion that if you have submitted a journal paper, you feel confident in the data you have. Of course, running more tests takes time, it takes materials, it takes resources. So you may be able to run a couple more, but in general, not a whole lot. And this will take time. Significant edits and added discussion will take time, but it should be doable in about 2 weeks. So you're not looking at a huge endeavor, but it will take some time. Now, the third one is major additions, and this is where you really need to be careful because it is very subjective. Every case is unique. I encourage you to talk to some of your more what I call seasoned graduate students, so graduate students that are come before you that have a couple of journal publications under their belt, and definitely talk to your advisor, because this is where experience comes in. Because, as I mentioned, it's very subjective and every case is unique. So let's talk a little bit more about number 3. Whenever you're thinking about major editions, you really need to ask some hard questions. And the first one is you need to say, is your content adequate? Because you may have thought it was, but based on reviewer comments, maybe it's not. Now, if you do believe it's adequate, you can say this is a good suggestion for future research and simply add 1 to 2 lines to the paper. So you're addressing the comment. So if a reviewer says you don't have enough data, you need to do this. You can say that's a great suggestion. That is something that should be done in the future. And you should address it, acknowledge it, say it's beneficial, but simply say it's good for future research. Now, if the content is not adequate, this is where you need to buckle down and do more work. And this can include perhaps revisiting literature, strengthening your analysis, run a handful or 2 more tests, those type of things. And if you're on the fence, you need to ask the question. The reviewer has provided a potential addition. Does this addition fit your core objectives? Does this addition complement your existing work? Does this addition expand the existing literature? If it is a yes to all 3 of these, perhaps you do need to consider it, even if it does require more work. But you also have to ask the question, do the additions increase the scope of work? And this is very important because you want to watch scope creep. It is very easy for a reviewer to say, hey, this is great, but have you considered this? Maybe you should do this. It would be great if we had this. And of course it would be, because that's more information. That's a better understanding. But with research, you need to ask the question, when do I draw the line and say we have a good set of data for publication? And then how do you make sure through the review process you do not expand that too significantly? And this is where the subjectiveness comes in, because you could sit down with 10 different sets of reviews and have 10 different opinions from 10 different people. So this is why you need to work with the people around you, work with your experts. And I actually didn't write this down anywhere, but I also recommend that you get on the list of some journals to be a paper reviewer, because seeing other people's work, seeing other people's comments really helps you understand how to become a better writer. Now, regardless of the category, regardless of the 3 categories I defined, the formatting is very important. So let's go over a little bit with formatting. When you are formatting your response to the reviewer comments, I suggest that you first create a Word document or whatever software you want to use. I use Microsoft, so you create a Word document and you cut and paste all of the comments into that document. When you're cutting and pasting and responding, you want to have a streamlined format. You do not want to return a 200-page document. You want this to be streamlined, you want it to be very consistent, you want it to be very professional, and you want it to be very clear. Don't try and be inventive, don't try and be creative. Consistent, professional, and clear. And what you want to do is you want to highlight the reviewer comments, you want to highlight your responses, and you want to highlight any sort of additional text you have. So for example, here is a Word document that was created for the paper titled Comparative Life Cycle Cost Analysis of Flexible and Rigid Pavement, a case study of 4 Arkansas roadway sections. And Amarjeet put together a very nice document where all the reviewer comments were underlined in orange. The reviewer response was in bold blue sapphire, and the modified text is in rich electric blue. Now, I personally wouldn't have used bold blue sapphire. I would have just left it black, but Amarjeet did a great job, and I'm using his as an example. And There were multiple reviewers for this paper. I believe there are 4 reviewers. And so you can see here, the title is on top, the formatting is next, and then you have reviewer 1 in bold. And the first reviewer comment was, "This paper gives a case study using 4 local road sections. From a writing perspective, this paper is well prepared. However, there are a few points that have to be addressed or clarified." So Amarjeet put this very clearly. This is what the first reviewer said. So when he resubmitted the paper, the first reviewer can look at the summary sheet and say, "This is great. They looked at all of our comments. This was my comments. This was their response. And this is how the text was modified." Again, thank you for Mr. Amarjeet Tiwari for providing this review. And if you look at the title of this paper, there's actually a Pavinar on it. It's a very fun paper to write, and Amarjeet did a great job. So let's look at some level 1 comment responses from this paper. Remember, the reviewer comments are orange underlined, the reviewer responses in bold blue sapphire, and the modified text is in rich electric blue. So a level comment response here was, "For some points it can be seen that the presentations in terms of payment structures and materials are not adequate." There were no explicit items mentioned. This is just a general comment. So Amarjeet simply said the paper was reviewed and the presentation of payment structures and materials were improved throughout. So he went through the paper. He located the places that he thought they talked about payment structures and materials, and he just made sure that it was all streamlined, it all made sense, it all flowed and put together well. So there's really not a whole lot to talk about here. He simply addressed these and moved on. Now, he did a very nice job with this paper. There was no request for spelling and grammar, which is actually quite impressive. Sometimes when I submit a paper, there are requests for spelling and grammar. So he did a great job with that. But that's another type of level 1 comment. Now, a level 2 comment. And this, at first reading, it may be intimidating, a little scary, because the reviewer said, "This is not the first study comparing flexible and rigid payments regarding LCCA. The author should highlight selected previous findings in the introduction and discuss the results in this context." Now, we had done this. So Amarjeet said, these 2 papers which we had cited had already been discussed, but there are relatively few reputable journals comparing LCCA flexible and rigid payments. However, Amarjeet went back to literature and added a couple. One from White in 2021, one from Adenikin from 2021 as well. So he went back to literature and he went in and looked at rigid and flexible, asphalt versus concrete, all of these different things. Maybe he looked at some different terminologies. He went back to TRID, but he dug back into literature and expanded the introduction and background section a little bit and incorporated some of these into the discussion of his results. So this is something where it took a little more work, but he just went ahead and did it, and we moved on. Now, some level 3 comment responses. This reviewer said a probabilistic analysis would be important in order to look at the cost differences and the observed differences between flexible and rigid payments. We agree with this 100%. A probabilistic analysis would be fantastic. However, we said in this paper we performed a deterministic analysis. Therefore, for this comment, we simply said it fell outside the scope of the study. And so we added just a little bit of text saying that since this was deterministic, a probabilistic analysis could enhance the analysis and should be considered in future studies. And I think this is completely reasonable because the paper had a tremendous amount of work in it. Of course, a probabilistic analysis would be interesting. But hey, if someone reads this paper, wants to take our data and perform a probabilistic analysis, that would be fantastic. I would love it. I think Amarjeet would love it. And if Amarjeet had an 8th day in his week, he would probably do it himself because it's a great idea for a completely separate study. So he acknowledged it, but he was very careful with avoiding scope creep, and he did a very nice job of thanking the author saying that it was a good idea, but saying it was simply beyond the scope of study. Another comment that can make first-time submitters a little nervous. Us more grizzled veterans are a little less impacted. It still feels a little bad, but their comment is this is a mature topic. Novelties are missing and had not been illustrated clearly. Now, I'm sure that I can do better in my job, but I would like to think that I never submit or I never ask my students to submit a peer-reviewed journal paper that should not be published. Now, it may not be published in that journal, but I think that the content is appropriate for publication. So this is kind of a hard comment to give. This is a little bit of tough love. Amarjeet did a great job, though. He agreed there's good published literature. But then he went on to emphasize that most of the literature talks about traditional treatments, like mill and fill. And our work tried to better understand more of the tools in the maintenance toolbox. He also indicated that he felt that the work that we did was a bit unique because we looked at multiple cross-sections and traffic types. So he said, yes, there is a lot of good literature out there, but we believe our work improved or expanded the literature in these different ways: more tools, more cross-sections, and more traffic types. And this is a fantastic way to reiterate our point. And so he added some text that explicitly said this. Now, maybe we did say this in other places. Maybe we only implied it in other places. Maybe we thought it, but we actually never wrote it. But on page 5, he added these lines talking about how we're expanding beyond the traditional maintenance. We're looking at more tools in the maintenance toolbox. We're looking at more cross-sections and traffic types. So he simply acknowledged the comment, kind of rehashed, described our scope and what was in this paper and put it in there. So this is a great job of sticking to the core objectives, which is maintaining the maintenance toolbox, expanding the maintenance toolbox, looking at those cross sections and looking at those traffic types. Now, another level 3 comment response is, what do researchers or engineers, how can they benefit from this study? How are these findings applicable to the entire industry? Great question. So Amarjeet talks about how we have a process now for comparing traditional maintenance to more of the tools in the maintenance toolbox for both flexible and rigid pavements. And he added a line talking about this, talking about understanding LCCA, talking about flexible and rigid pavements, thinking about pavements in a 50-year lifespan, not just the construction, looking at pavement types, and a structured approach. So again, he did a good job of sticking to the core objectives, expanding the maintenance toolbox, but just kind of weaving some of the comments responses into the paper. Now, I explicitly said that the level 3 comments are very subjective. Maybe something you can do with your lab group or with your advisor is take a look at the paper. You can download it and read it. I think it's a great paper. I'm a little biased. And look at some of these comment responses and see how do you think our group addressed them? How do you think they could have been addressed differently? How do you think maybe they could have been even done better? There are different ways for sure. Are they better? Are they not better? I believe that is subjective. So this could be a little exercise if you want to do something with your group. Or you can take a previously published paper in your group and you can look at those comments and kind of do a similar study, a similar exercise is going through the comments and seeing how they could be changed and what are the pros and cons of each one. So in recap, please, I know that responding to reviewer comments can be intimidating, it can be a little frustrating at points, but you need to congratulate yourself. And I believe that there's 3 categories of reviewer comments: editorial and grammar, significant edits, and major additions. As you go through your comments, you want to watch your scope creep. As you review and respond to comments, you're increasing your time and your costs, but you also could be losing some resources. You could be expending effort. So these are things that you don't want to get out of control. In your responses, you want to have consistent, professional, and clear formatting in your responses. And a couple things that you could potentially do today is one, get on the list of a journal to review papers and start reviewing other people's papers. It will open your eyes to the reviewing process. It can be Transportation Research Board, it can be RMPD, IJPE, ASCE Journal of Transportation Pavements. There are a ton of them out there. I talk about them in my literature review, Pavinar. But review journal articles. Another opportunity is ask your advisor, ask other grad students, have you had to do this? Can we go over the comments that you received in your paper and maybe go through an exercise together in responding to the reviewer comments? So there's a lot of different things that you can potentially do. But I appreciate you spending the time. Thank you very much and hope you have a wonderful day.